Okay, I'm back again, and I guess I should just say, how did we get here? Um, well, we got here back in 2001. It's kind of hard to say that, um, and it's really interesting that we were lied to for so long about this war that we were winning, we were taking the fight to the enemy, that the Afghan government had this huge, massive army of 300,000 plus men and personnel who were ready to fight and die for the soil of Afghanistan. And none of that turned out to be true. We weren't winning against the Taliban. Essentially, they went to other regions of the area, mainly Pakistan, and just waited. Essentially, just took to the hills and the tribal areas uh, of Pakistan and just waited for the U.S. to leave. And that was always their goal. That they knew that the U.S. was never going to stay long term, and they said they basically committed to build up their forces and wait until the U.S. left. And so that's essentially what happened. The media has to share the lion's share of the blame on this, but also the U.S. government over the past, four uh, presidential administrations we were lied to. Not just the lies that Joe Biden told this week about how the imminent collapse of Afghanistan to the Taliban was not inevitable, but it actually was inevitable. It actually was inevitable, and it was pretty much predicted. We knew this back in 2019 through the Afghan papers that throughout the Bush administration, the Obama administration, and the Trump administration, we didn't even know who we were fighting. We didn't know whether we were fighting the Taliban. We didn't know if we were fighting some other Islamist group, and we really just forgot the mission of what we were supposed to do in Afghanistan. The chief mission that we were promised in Afghanistan was that we would destroy the perpetrators of 9/11, which was Al Qaeda, and not make Afghanistan a safe haven for them, and that we would go after Bin Laden. Well, for most of you who don't know, that happened in 2011 for pretty much the most part. The Taliban was pretty much, I mean, the Taliban pretty much, who had supported them were mainly in Pakistan and also, Al Qaeda had been degraded in Afghanistan, as early as 2002. And so, why were we still there? It didn't really make any sense. It didn't really cause too much consternation in the media because of the simple fact of war's a racket. Smedley Butler said that almost 100 years ago. War's a racket. If you can make a penny off of war, people will continue to go to war, and that's what we stood for. The better part of a decade now, through the Obama administration, the Trump administration, and uh, uh, now the Biden administration. And so, what I don't know how we could not have seen this because all the promises that we were made in Iraq never came to fruition. There's not a functioning government for the most part in most of the country, and it was very susceptible to terrorist extremists. We saw that in ISIS storming across much of Iraq, and the Iraqi government being totally ineffective and corrupt and inept, essentially against an external threat. And um, it's just hardening. It's just disheartening to see that through all of this, the people who made the most money were defense contractors, whether it's Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, Boeing, uh, you know, uh, just all the people who make arms made away with gangbuster amounts of money. And don't be, confused. The war, uh, in Afghanistan might be over, but there's always going to be a war that uh, corporations are going to seek to make money off of. It's just the staggering level of corruption in Afghanistan was just unprecedented uh, at the highest level. But also, you see it in mainly, uh, the fact that many of the people in our government now, you look at Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, he came straight from a defense contractor. And so they're not even trying to hide it anymore that, hey, this is what we're, trying to do. And so it's hard to fully understand what, uh, what American exceptionalism is, because the mission changed to nation build. And obviously we didn't nation build very well in Iraq when we diverted forces from Afghanistan and um, made that our main focus, and that was always the main focus of people like Donald Rumsfeld and Dick Cheney because of the oil and natural resources and the geopolitics of the region. And so it was never our mission to really make these functioning countries. Just look at the endeavors that we did after Iraq and Afghanistan, which were quote unquote the noble wars. Syria, you look at Libya, you look at Somalia, you look at you know uh, uh, north and Africa in the Sahel region. Uh, you look at just most of these places we've gone, Yemen. Uh, most of these places we've gone, they haven't you know, been more stable or brought peace and prosperity to this people. And so that was essentially what was never going to happen in uh, Afghanistan. Just a brief history of Afghanistan. Afghanistan's never really been a thing. Its history starts about, you know, in the late 15th century, and the idea of an actual Afghanistan doesn't really start taking form until about the 1700s into the 1800s. Um, I think it was about 1850 or something like that that the British, like 1840 or 1850, that the British went in there and just suffered one of their largest defeats of the 19th century, and most devastating defeat of the 19th century. And they kind of took a hands off approach to it and kind of let Afghanistan do its own thing for, you know, the next 150 years. Obviously, there were other interventions done in Afghanistan with the Anglo-Afghan wars, but, they kind of stayed out of it. And it wasn't until about the 19, 60s or 70s that you really had a functioning government in Afghanistan. And even then, it was really a very decentralized government. It really only had a few centers of power in Afghanistan, mainly the capital, Kabul. And so it really was never really the idea of nationalism in Afghanistan never really existed like it did in like France or Germany or uh, the United States or Britain or uh, like other countries around the world. It was really just this thing that was carved up by colonial powers, the Russian Empire and the British Empire, to kind of be a buffer between their empires and also, China as well. Uh, and yeah, it just never really existed as a thing. And so to get nation building out of a place that doesn't really have a national identity in not only a modern sense, but even a pre-modern sense of nationhood. It never really existed in Afghanistan. Like, yeah, there was always a strong leader or leaders in Afghanistan, um, but it never really came to fruition in the sense of an actual country. Many of the inhabitants of Afghanistan still have greater ties to, you know, uh, their tribal affiliation than they do to a national government or, to their particular region in Afghanistan. And so that's what you're really going to see bifurcate a lot of Afghanistan is that, it's it was all a grift. The idea that we could transform a place that never really had a national identity. Our intentions may have been noble in the beginning, but once there was money to be made, it kind of descended into this massive corruption. You had these ghost soldiers who didn't really exist, but they were still collecting paychecks from the U.S. government. We left them tons of equipment that's now in the hands of the Taliban, which they were never gonna they were never gonna maintain Apache helicopters and having the Air Force and uh, be an effective fighting force. And although there were units of Afghanistan's army that probably were capable of defending the country, but I believe that some of the leadership in the Afghan army was so corrupt that they were just able to be bought off by uh, the Taliban, and essentially there goes the whole facade crumbling down. When you have people who don't really want to fight, that's what's going to happen. And when you have people who don't want to fight and have weapons, guess what? The enemy's going to have those weapons, and if they're willing to fight, they're going to fight and die for what they believe is, their goals and aims. And so, the Afghan army, 300,000 strong, meant really nothing to a bunch of, what was it, about 60 or 70,000 fighters from the Taliban. And so, yeah, you're just gonna see a lot of this corruption, and people are saying like, "Oh, the Afghanistan." It's like, no, of course, the Afghanistan government is corrupt. Look at Iraq, and so it's not just the Afghanistan government; it's our government that's corrupt. It's the whole globalized international system that's corrupt. That you can have these people make money off war. Um, just checking my notes here. Uh, And yeah, it was, and just the intelligence failures of the better part of a decade just continue to fuel this war that was senseless. And so American corruption is, it doesn't need to be overstated, but yeah, the military industrial complex made its bones, and uh, also a very interesting conspiracy theory that is floating out there is that now that the government has sunk so much money into COVID vaccines, that the use of opium, which for those of you who don't know, U.S. soldiers protected opium fields, which uh, were the production of heroin in much of the world coming from Afghanistan. And so I think now that the pharmaceutical and the industrial death machine of the United States has, the military industrial complex has moved on from Afghanistan, they're just going to find some other excuse, to, provocate a war. Um, you see it in, uh, the airstrikes in Somalia, and and that's the biggest grift of all. That they keep saying that, oh, what about the women and girls in Afghanistan? They didn't care about the women and girls in Afghanistan, because if that was really truly the case, they would have gotten those people out. They wouldn't have kept those people in Afghanistan uh, to try to build a failed, corrupt system, where you had people taking money from the U.S. government and then going right back and selling arms to the Taliban or helping the Taliban, and it's all these things about Afghan commanders having child sex slaves. It's just the cesspool of corruption and just overall grift that just is sad. I think that there really were good intentions in some people's hearts to remake Afghanistan, and it just didn't happen. So uh, it's a war that when it started I was too young to serve, and now I'm too old to serve now that it's ended. So don't forget to like and subscribe, and don't forget, it's with a Y.